Hey everyone, welcome to Civil War Connections, the Civil War clip show that takes modern day reenactors and relates them to present AP literature topics. Today we will be discussing The Leopard, Age of Innocence, and Heart of Darkness. To do this, as always, we will be taking well-known topics central to the books and putting them into the context of the American Civil War to give us a greater understanding of not only these themes, but the constant struggle that was the war and how it shapes our nation today. Our first topic on the list will be Age of Innocence and how it relates to geopolitics.
My name is Alexander Williamson, Private 20th Maine Company G. That's about it.
Perfect. Now, what we were wondering is, in the Civil War, how did the U.S. deal with Europe and its other neighboring countries?
Well, it's a tough one, because, when the war started, most people, the Confederacy, our enemies, the Confederacy, they wanted to seek allyship with, England, France, Spain, anyone in Europe that would help them, and luckily, the most they ever got was a trade deal with England, which brought them Enfield rifles, but at the same time, it's odd because they sold us Enfield rifles, so technically they've been selling weapons to both sides just to kill both sides. So it's kind of a really messed up sort of irony when you think about it. But in terms of how the rest of the world views us currently, I wonder if they think that this war is either going to take a short amount of time or if it's going to take more than it already has taken. I'm more concerned to see what would happen if it does drag on for long, to see what the world will do in the unfortunate circumstance that we lose this war.
Do you think that Europe is influential, or do you think that America is influential?
I think at this stage, Europe is extremely influential. Do you see what they're doing in Mexico right now? The French have invaded Mexico. We can't stop them because we're fighting our own selves here. And, let's say the Confederacy wins. England has a direct trade route with someone who's just going to give them all the cotton they want.
Now moving on from the American continent, we find ourselves in the jungles of the Congo, where it is a war zone on itself. And as we all know, within all war zones we find fear.
My name is Corporal Audie Adams of the 20th Maine, and I'm a specialist on fear.
People really wonder about the Civil War because we're very disconnected from it. But what do you think, in your opinion, is how scary was it to be on the battlefield?
What I think people don't really conceptualize based on our modern society where there's movies where things explode on screen every half second or so. People don't like the power of a 12-pounder cannon, the force you can feel, the physical vibrations you can feel go through your chest, and the popping in your ears as that sound hits you. It's frankly indescribable. And even here, where we're in a safe environment, it's still sometimes it is awe-inspiring. It's terrifying, especially when you don't know what to expect. So I can't imagine what it would have been like for 18, 19-year-olds who were getting recruited and actually getting shot at.
And how do you think, what would happen to someone if they got too scared, you think, on the battlefield?
Well, a few things can happen. People can just freeze up. You don't know what to do. You can't process everything that's coming at you. This cavalcade of stimulus, and you can just freeze. Or what also happened, people would run. They would turn and run, and because you can't have an army that runs away, then your officer would come over and he would pop you in the back of the head.
Life-changing experiences can always have one changing their beliefs, and during the Civil War, no such topic was changing as frequently as that of slavery.
So, my name is Private Charlie Mossberger, and I'm a race specialist.
Who are you with, Private Mossberger?
I'm with the 20th Maine Company G.
Beautiful, all right? So, the problem is lots of us don't really understand what race was like during the Civil War. We can't really comprehend what it was like to have slavery. So, the big question that we all have to think about when considering these kinds of subjects is, what was the big deal with slavery?
So throughout American history, we've had slaves working in various places in America. And at the time of the Civil War, it was becoming more and more of a contentious issue in American politics. People in the North didn't want slavery to continue. It was a human rights violation, they saw. But people in the South, the Southern economy depended on slavery. Slaves were used on plantations to pick crops, and it was a huge part of the Southern economy. So the South was really against ending slavery and wanted to continue the spread of slavery because they thought it would support their economy better.
And because slavery is a human rights violation, how did governments handle it?
So, in 1863, the President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which was a really big move to free all the slaves that were currently slaves at the time. And that was really important because that was the first really big step towards ending slavery that was taken in the American government.
Last question. How did the American people, or the everyday man, feel about slavery?
North or South?
Both.
Both. Well, in the North, people were still racist at the time. That's one thing that, a lot of people think North was not racist at all. A lot of people think, no, a lot of people were still pretty racist. But in the South, a lot of people wanted to keep slavery because they knew it benefited them. Even the poor people, not everyone in the South owned slaves. It was the rich people in the South that owned land, owned plantations, they were the slave owners. But even the lower class that didn't own slaves, the lower class white people that didn't own slaves, still supported slavery for the most part because they saw it as something that they could rise to. They wanted to, rise up in the social class and thought, someday I'll own slaves, I'll have a big plantation, I'll be rich. But people in the North, where slavery wasn't as big of a motivator, in the economy, they were mostly against it because they didn't see that as something they could rise to.
A higher level of inspiration could definitely be found. One such may be the lifting of one's pride, as in the leopard seen here.
Hey there, I'm Chris Boland. I'm a private in the 20th Maine Volunteer Infantry Company G.
I was thinking, we talk about the Victorian age. People really think of the Victorian age as a prideful time. Would you agree or disagree?
I'd say that there are definitely elements of it. There's definitely elements of it. That's the thing is, there was a greater concept of honor back in the day. Much more so than now. In terms of people would be willing to do very much to not forsake their honor. For example, in the Civil War, one of the reasons why you didn't get mass retreats and everything from the field of battle in terrible situations like Shiloh or Fredericksburg, for example, is because the men that the troops were fighting alongside were their friends, their family members in some cases, or their people from their same town. And they knew each other. They didn't want to lose face or dishonor themselves for all time, for their entire lives, by running away.
And what would you say face is?
That's a hard question. I'd say for the people back then, it was how did other folks view me? That was for people back then. And I think the definition now has kind of changed into slightly, it has a bit of a prideful tone, and people don't like to be prideful, they don't like to stick themselves out there very much, because it's seen as rude to be prideful nowadays. So you want to be the least prideful you can. But back then, honor and dignity and pride in what you did was everything.
What do you think is the most important takeaway to understand people's mentalities during the Civil War?
I think the takeaway of honor being valuable, because today we think of ourselves as being worth whatever people put into us. But back then, it was a thing you felt you had to earn. And especially around the 1860s, with so many new immigrants to the US, there was this cultural feel of, I need to prove myself. Because I'm not worth anything in the eyes of the world. I need to prove myself. And so that may be the biggest takeaway, is that you need to prove yourself. Make yourself worth it.
Perfect. With pride comes the need to prove oneself. And the best field would be the one of mortality.
Hi, my name is Alphonse Capistrano, and I'm a corporal with the 20th Maine Company G.
How was death handled?
Well, to give you an idea, about the average age of a soldier, not only in just our attachment, but in the Union Army, is about 25 years old. And a lot of these guys came from the same town. We're talking fathers, brothers, sons of fathers, your grandfather, everyone in that town generally formed a company. In fact, that's the same example with our company. A lot of these guys are from the same town. So the impact to see these young guys, maybe fathers, but also their sons, to see them die at such a young age, because, well, to put it quite frankly, when you're shot on the battlefield, there's a chance you're probably not coming back.
Now, hopefully, we can end this discussion on a happier note with a delightful conversation on what it was to have an afterlife during the Civil War.
Cormac Kelly, Lieutenant of the 20th Maine.
Was religion decisive during the Civil War?
It was decisive in the conduct of the war, not so much, but it was a key motivator. It cannot be discounted in bringing soldiers to enlist in the army. You had, between the North and the South, you had a large differentiation between their versions of Christianity. You had in the South, in line with their views of government, this Jacksonian democracy where government is supposed to take very little role in the everyday lives of those around them, and it's much more individualistic. Thus, so is religion in the South. It's very, it's based not so much in the mainline Protestant denominations like Presbyterianism and Episcopalianism, which are much more dominant in the North, but there are a lot more Baptists and the religious revivals that go across the country and the lead up to the Civil War are a key exemplar of this, where communities would come together and have a week-long tent revival, songs and multiple sermons, and this whole individualist aspect of Protestantism, but also it's a much more radical view than the mainline Protestant faiths, which were dominant in the North. But also in the North, you had a large number of Catholics coming from Germany and from Ireland in the 1840s and 50s, from the upheavals that were taking place in those countries. And this leads to a cultural difference as well between North and South, which is brought about by religion. And then also you have to keep into mind that the black soldiers who fight for the Union, and the vast majority of black soldiers fight in the Civil War, fight for the Union, do so with a keen sense of religious faith, based upon their view that they are acting out the story of Exodus, where they are fighting for the liberation of their entire race from servitude. And it takes on a very righteous religious cause. And when you read the letters of many black soldiers, and there are a surprising number of letters from former slaves who fight in the Union Army, you find that this religious theme runs throughout.
What do you think is the most influential thing about religion for the Civil War?
The defense of slavery by the South was anchored in their view that the black man is inferior, and they anchor this in their interpretation of the Bible. They anchor this in their idea that in Noah's son, the sons of Ham, are, in their view, the blacks that will go on to be their slaves, and they justify their holding of blacks in their interpretations of the Bible. And at the same time, you have abolitionism is deeply religious in the North, is deeply based upon this idea coming from Exodus that it is wrong to hold people in slavery. It's all based upon the different interpretations of the Bible, which make it a very clear cultural difference and lead to a feeling of division that makes war a possibility.